Now, in terms of structuring your lexical items here and paraphrasing properly, well, it's just like building a house. Now, remember, we are going to incorporate these systems. So we have a question over here, and it's the same question that we saw before. Now, you know exactly what not to do with this, which is, of course, you don't want to copy the question. You don't want to copy the words. Well, how do I make sure that I'm not copying the words? And that's probably the question that you are asking. Well, we're going to talk about a little system here, and this is going to really become second nature for you as you work through exam simulations. And for some of you, maybe you're going to get it right away, and that's going to be fantastic. Well, we need to change those keywords in the question. So what are the keywords in here? Well, we have quite a few over here. So interested, film, playing, cinema, and of course, more information. So these are the words that you should be really thinking about in, of course, formulating your why sentence. And we can't really use these words in there, or I'm not saying we can't, but we should not really use all these words in there. So what do? Well, we need to change those words into something else. How do we do this? Well, there's 3 methods that you're going to incorporate from now on, really. And you're going to do this really all the way through to your exam, maybe even after you finish your exam and you get that score you need, and you're writing emails at work, or you're going to school in Canada or US or Australia or somewhere, and you need to rephrase some words. Well, you're going to use this strategy again. All right, so there's 3 techniques that we use for this. Now, one is simply using a synonym. All right, so for a lot of you, people watching this video, like I said before, our clients are usually people who are at an intermediate or advanced level of English. And of course, you need to get some knowledge of the exam itself. Well, the way to do this, of course, and the way to get that high score and really incorporate and show off your English knowledge in the context of the IELTS exam is to strategize. Now, for all of you, you have this base knowledge of English that we are using in our strategies. So for finding synonyms, you probably have these in your repertoire already, and we, of course, are going to use these. Well, what if you can't find a synonym for a word? Well, then we can change the tense of the word that they give us, and that counts as a new word, which of course helps us in getting that higher score in lexical. Well, what if I don't have a synonym and I can't think of a new tense for that word? Well, we have another option for you, which is using the before-after method. So how do we use these? Well, let's take a look at some examples here dealing specifically with the question that we are looking at, which is, of course, the question about the film that we saw earlier. All right, so as soon as you see the word interested, and remember, in your exam, you can write on that question sheet. So you might want to circle or underline those words in the question itself. Or maybe you'll just do this in your mind as you work through the question. All right, so for interested, well, we can change the tense. Now we have the first example there, which says interesting. And that's perfect. Well, what if we can think of a synonym? All right, well, a synonym for being interested in something is looking forward to. What if I can't think of a synonym or a tense to change interested? No problem. We're going to add a word before the word interested to change the meaning. And that word is deeply. So I am deeply interested in this. Now what you want to do, of course, is have as many options at your disposal as possible. So we're probably not going to use, we're going to see later on when we talk about the structure a little bit more, that we're not going to use these words too often. We're only going to use them once each, really. And that, of course, shows the examiner that we're not relying on the same words again and again and again, which would probably bring down our lexical score to a 5. Instead, we have enough words to talk about this subject thoroughly. And of course, we can bounce around using either a synonym, as we saw over here, which is, of course, looking forward to. We could change the tense, which is interesting. And of course, remember, you'd have to make sure the grammar works when you change that tense. And of course, we have the before-after method, which in this case is before, which is deeply interested. Okay, so that was how we analyzed that first word, which is interested. Well, we have a few more words that we need to look at as well. Film. Okay, so maybe you can't think of another word for film, or maybe you can't think of a way to change that tense. It's a noun, so it's a little bit difficult to change the tense. Well, we can always use the before-after method. Now, if you thought of the word synonym for film, that's perfect. All right, so a synonym for film is movie. Another synonym for film is motion picture. In terms of changing the tense, even personally, I couldn't think of another word. To change the tense of film, it just doesn't exist because film is a noun, of course. So we can't use this method in this particular case. However, we can use the before-after method, and we can get a little bit more specific by saying action film. So remember when we talked about your speaking methods, we spoke pretty deeply about using those 3 circles, where you're going from something general to more specific to an example. We're going to see in our strategies for this, we're going to use something similar once we move into topic 1, 2, and 3. But for this why sentence, we can be a little bit more specific by changing that word film into action film or drama film or romance film. All right, so another word, of course, is playing. So playing is, of course, one of the other words we're going to have to strategize with and paraphrase to make sure that we can get that high score in lexical resource. Well, we have showing, maybe shown if we change the grammar around, or scheduled to play. All right, for cinema. Now, cinema is a little bit more difficult. I'll give you 10 seconds just to think of another word for cinema or to see if we can use this strategy for cinema. All right, so did you think of another word for cinema? It's a little bit difficult, right? So we could say movie theater, and there's an asterisk on here just because I wanted to bring up a point that some people have, or a question that some people have about spelling. And should I use American or British spelling? Well, in IELTS, there's no difference. It's marked the exact same. So theater, of course, spelled like this, R-E is the American style. Which for a lot of you, you might use this style more. A lot of our clients are in Mexico, Philippines, places like that where there is maybe a little bit more of an American influence. And it's perfectly fine to use American spelling. So theater, center, for example. Center with American spelling is C-E-N-T-R-E. Meanwhile, with British spelling, theater, for example, would be exactly like this, but just reverse the E and the R. And of course, for center, for example, it'd be C-E-N-T-E-R as well in British spelling. But for you, whatever you feel more comfortable with, that's what you use. There's no difference in the scoring for that. Okay, and for cinema as well, there is another word that we could use, which of course is movie theater. And maybe we could even be a little bit more specific. So when we saw film and we added a word before film, we said action film, and that changes the word, and it's perfect. Well, cinema, we could do the same thing. Maybe we could change the name of it to Cineplex Cinema to give it actually a name of a cinema to, again, change the word. All right, and finally, more information. I think more information is a fantastic word to change, to paraphrase, using this method. Now, I'm going to give you, again, just a few seconds so that you can try to change that word, more information, try to strategize with what we would actually write in our why sentence when we are asking, of course, for more information. So your 10 seconds starts now. All right, let's see how we did here. Now, a way to change the word more information could be like this, to be a little bit more specific, additional details. Or we could even be a little bit more precise with this. And the reason why we are, of course, looking at these methods, so we had 5 words here, and we wound up with about 12 different words for this. Well, what we need to think about, of course, is the fact that in the exam, you're not going to be able to use this method as thoroughly as we just did right now. You might have some words where you just can't change the word. You don't know, you don't have it in your lexical repertoire, or maybe the time is counting down, so you don't have time to change it. that's perfectly fine. What you should be aiming for, of course, is to change. In this example, it was 5 words. Well, it'd be a good idea to change, of course, all 5 of those words for your why sentence. But if you can't, it's important to change as many of them as you can. So maybe you couldn't find another way to write more information. That's fine. As long as you have another word for interested, film, playing, cinema, you're covered. Maybe you couldn't find another word for interested, or you couldn't think of a way to transfer the grammar to work with interesting or something like that. That's fine. As long as you're covered in the other lexical items, you will still be likely to get that high score in lexical resource. So what we're doing, of course, with this strategy is really covering the bases to make sure that you don't get into any trouble if something happens on exam day, or maybe there's a tricky word in there that you can't paraphrase.